there has been definitely a leapfrogging effect that's been happening in the developing world. For instance, Nigeria is one of the most advanced kind of crypto hotbeds, as is Venezuela and Colombia, places that people might not think of as being super prosperous or really tech savvy, but out of necessity and out of kind of this leapfrogging, where they just went from like 0 to 60 instead of hitting 10 and 20 and 30 on the way up. They now have way greater kind of penetration opportunities because people have been accustomed to using cryptocurrency. They went straight into mobile devices and smartphones, and they kind of skipped a lot of the legacy stuff that can fragment a space and make it sometimes more challenging to tackle. You can come in with something knowing like, okay, we've got an audience and like 95% of usage is on mobile device instead of like 50 on desktop and 50 on mobile, which then you need like two totally different environments, two totally different go-to-market strategies. And yeah, we've seen huge uptake in some of those Central American countries, just based on even the relative value of the token to their lifestyle. I mean, in North America, what we pay as an incentive isn't really enough to change a user behavior in some cases, but in a place that definitely doesn't earn as much, they feel like, oh yeah, this is awesome, and I'm going all in on it. And we've got one YouTuber from Venezuela who latched onto this early on and brought in like a ton of users, and through a referral program ended up with like a couple 100,000 Presearch tokens in incentives. And we've actually got a really strong user base of like legit people in Venezuela. They might not have huge earning power right now, but they've also got huge oil reserves, and they've got a beautiful, geography and a lot of natural resources. And, at some point a paradigm might flip and all of a sudden Venezuela, it becomes a big prosperous country, and we've already got a foothold in there. So, it's kind of like you're trying to balance all the time, the legacy side of things and the economic value of different areas with the growth potential and the potential that an area could have if the right political conditions generally came into play. And yeah, they continue on that kind of technology growth and adoption curve. So it's interesting.
Definitely interesting. Yeah. Venezuela is one where even I've been interested in actually visiting. Like that's kind of on the list here for South America. Near the end is like Suriname, Guyana, French Guinea, and then potentially going into Venezuela. But what, sometimes you're right. When a country's in a state like this where it's kind of in a lockdown almost, like economically, right? So it's this problem politically where they're not getting a lot of foreign direct investments. You have kind of the friendly nations of the US, the friendly nations of Russia. Venezuela is more like with Iran, with Russia, in that situation. But yeah, kind of gaining users in that space and being able to do that all over, just like Helium would do with the Wi-Fi, I find fascinating. And really also having it as like you said, if someone's able to make a nice income in some of these countries like Venezuela from doing that, then also if they're a long-term believer and they run this node for a long time, they're incentivized and they're going to make a lot more money, especially like the exponential benefits of seeing kind of a network effect rise in a project like yours is really interesting, really, really interesting.
Yeah, and I mean a lot of it is kind of to some degree in these areas. It's kind of hinged on like the success of cryptocurrency. Honestly, there's a ton of Bitcoin usage down there. They've had to hedge against the debasement of their national fiat currency, and so there's huge Bitcoin adoption, and people hold Bitcoin at a much higher rate as far as market penetration goes than they would in like Canada, for instance. And so let's say we have these black swan events. Who knows what's happening in, the macro economy. But let's say Bitcoin does come out on top, and let's say Bitcoin does go to like $1 a bit or $1 million a Bitcoin. You may end up with, these nations that were formerly, kind of not particularly prosperous in this new world ending up to be quite prosperous. So it's there's a lot of change happening. Obviously, you're, very aware of that, and you're looking at all the ways that you can kind of benefit from it and hedge against some of the downsides of that change. But yeah, there's some really interesting geographies out there. I mean, we're core focused on kind of U.S. and North America, just from a monetization standpoint, from an adoption standpoint. But when we get these little like experiments that happen, where they're kind of like organically, and all of a sudden, oh, you've got this huge community of users, and they're like legit users, and there are some that will spring up where it's like they're abusive, and it's like, oh man, we got to figure out how to like tamper that abuse. Honestly, we found like in a place like Venezuela, they might not have huge economic resources, but honestly, like we've had direct communications with them, and there's like an anti-abuse system that's built into the project, because token farming is one of the biggest things that we've had to protect against. And honestly, within that community, we really don't run into it. It's like, man, they're just legit users. They use Presearch as their search engine, and they're not trying to really farm tokens or anything. And it almost makes you like, well, man, what if Presearch got big? And all of a sudden, like it's not the Bitcoin thing. It's, oh yeah, you've got a whole bunch of, Venezuelans who have a bunch of pre, and that could help, raise the economic tides of that country, based on really ultimately one person who had a huge YouTube channel, and got a whole bunch of people on board. So I don't know, just kind of fun, different kind of thought experiments as far as like what could happen, and how could things play out, and how can people ultimately change their financial destinies, and provide better for their families, and build stronger communities, and all these things. And that to me is one of the more exciting things about crypto, is just that potential for change, and switch away from this central banker dominated kind of clown world, unfortunately, that they've been creating.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think with a project like yours, you just provide really a platform for countries like that to actually be competitive. And that's always something I'm fascinated in, right? Is like everybody sees businesses like, yeah, it should be a free market. You should strive to make the best product, make it the best experience for the customers. But countries really kind of now are starting to have to compete. You see this in different citizenship investment programs. But when it comes to adopting a technology like for example, just I truly see is like, if you're adopting Bitcoin as one of the acceptable reserve currencies of the country, you're adopting a new technology, right? It's just a new money technology. And when you kind of use potentially, yeah, a new browser or something like that, and that kind of becomes common in that country, which it really isn't now. I mean, I know India has like certain browsers that they use that are very popular there. Russia has different browsers, but mostly outside of China, Google dominates pretty much everywhere. And at the end of the day, like you see things like WeChat, where again, this kind of network effect you have on these platforms is so powerful. I think it's just hard to quantify the exact value of that thing, right? It's because as the world becomes more and more technology dependent, whereas in a lot of the places that I'm traveling, I see places where, like, for example, they still only take cash, which in the US or in Canada is not very common. Even in Asia now is not very common. You do see it still in South America. You still see it in Africa and in Eastern Europe. But at the end of the day, it's one of these things where you don't see these adoption in these places. And again, when this technology really hits, I think they're gonna just from the start adopt in Web3, because it's more of an incentive for them, right? It's because again, I think in most people that just use these things in like Western countries, it's just the default, because it's not even like a thought, right? It's because they're like, I have other things to worry about. So I don't need to know how my privacy browser works,
Yep. Yeah, totally. It's an opportunity to connect with people that just have different priorities ultimately, and they do see different opportunities. And there are, yeah, I think ultimately just in this, changing global landscape. I mean, going down and looking at farmland in South America, maybe 30 years ago, like, oh, why would you bother doing that? We got plenty of farmland in Iowa, obviously, but now it's like, oh, we're looking at places with different protections and different, economic opportunities. Real estate has become so priced up here, and dominated ultimately by some larger players, that it makes sense to start looking elsewhere. And so then, as that kind of shift happens, it opens up different opportunities for people in that area to capitalize and to kind of grow in different directions. And with just such a malleable world right now, it feels like the old orders are crumbling. There's maybe a new world order that they're trying to promote, and there might be somewhere in between where different types of people, it might be that, man, South America might end up the land of the free. And that could very well just kind of jive with their culture, and the fact that it's kind of decentralized as far as there's so many countries down there. It's not like, one dominant kind of, like in the US. I mean, that's a really large landmass to be dominated by one very powerful central government. So it might end up being, whether it's the Caribbean, or whether it's somewhere in Africa or somewhere in South America, that those who don't have those huge, deep, central banker kind of legacy ties end up becoming, places where people who really value freedom end up flocking to, and you could just have like a totally different order that ends up developing there. So yeah, it's an interesting time, definitely.
Yeah, yeah, it's like self-terminating societies, right? Like the countries that are most
Yes,
overdeveloped, then it's like you start taking advantage of that. And but then there's all these other places where it's like if you had any idea how much they want to be in that place, it's like two completely different worlds. But
that's right.
it's like traveling back in time in a lot of these places, you know. So like
Right.
for me, it's interesting to like contrast like Kosovo, you know, it's like this small country, maybe 1 million people in very Eastern Europe, and like Georgia and these places to like France or Germany, where it's like so developed and like just not that long of a flight, and you have a completely different world, and that's just in one continent, right? So there's even more interesting opportunities like here in South America and Africa, even some places in like Southeast Asia, I think are quite interesting. But yeah, things are changing very, very fast.
Totally. And, technology is enabling us to work remotely and do this kind of thing. I mean, we started off like a pretty good laugh, honestly, for this video. And it kind of hit me after. I'm like, oh, it's funny. I don't think I've ever had like a laugh attack with somebody over Zoom, in this way, somebody that I really didn't know before the call. And it's interesting that you're, down in Peru and I'm up here in Canada, and
Yeah,
yeah, you can have that kind of real connection through video, and it is, kind of a much flatter landscape as far as
definitely. Yeah,
yeah, the ability to kind of connect still. So
crazy. Yeah, it really is.